In our previous series, we devoted an episode to the art of foreshadowing in fiction. And this time, we'll be looking backwards in our fictional chronologies in this discussion about memory and flashback. Welcome to the Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Hello.
Hello, Chris Gregory.
That almost sounded rehearsed. Well, I mean, we are 20-odd episodes
It's almost
in,
like
so.
we did that last week.
And the week before. And the week before that. And the week before that.
Surely
I seem
not.
to have these memories, and sometimes they're flashbacks. But I want to ask you to start with, how large a part has memory played in your work?
Oh, as in memory in the story, in the character memory.
Choose how you wish to answer that question.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to start with the paint palette, which is a really useful way of getting into the fact that we do all have the right to our memories and the right to our imagination, the right to our observations about the world and mixing them. That what I have said in your creative writing toolkit and in the courses and workshops is always about mixing the colours. You've got every memory that is currently floating around your head, and it's not about how accurate it is, and it's not about nobody disagreeing with you or remembering it differently. It's that's what you've got in your head, and we are mixing all of our memories with our imagination and those observations and those questions about the world, and we are mixing unique colours in order to make even more unique colours. So the permission to use memory is a thing of its own that I really think deserves a lot of neon arrows pointing at it, is permission to use your memories. Because we get in our own way with that a lot. So-and-so would be angry, so-and-so wouldn't see it like that. It's your story, and you're not doing it just to finger point and go, I was right and someone else is wrong. You're doing it because you're curious about something in that story. And you're only going to really know what that is when you draw freely on it.
Yeah.
Emily, memory.
Okay, well, I would say when it comes to memory, memories are stories that we tell ourselves about what happened in the past. We're not ever going to remember them absolutely truthfully. And I think acknowledging that is a great thing to do, because if you sit there and say, I remember this exactly as it was, it's not a very good start, because nobody does. Great example of this is my surname is Inkpen. The story about how that name, because it was my spouse's mother's maiden name, and we chose to take that. Now, the story of that conversation where we chose to take that name, I remember it one way. My spouse remembers it another way. I prefer my story. And so that's the one I tell. And they are absolutely adamant that it happened their way. And I don't remember it like that at all. And so I am like, well, who's to say your way is how it happened? If my memory is completely different, mine might be right and you could be wrong. They struggle with that. It has to be said. So I get around this just by saying, well, I like my story better. And honestly, at the end of the day, we get to the point where we say, yeah, we chose the name Inkpen, so who cares? But yeah, that's memory. Memory is the stories we tell ourselves and the details that stick out to us in those memories, because I think we were chatting about this earlier in the season. You were saying the things that are important to other people, like you will remember something that happened, but they won't remember it. And it's because that thing that happened from your perspective was incredibly important to them. It was just a passing detail. They didn't even think about it. But for you, it left a lasting impression. So the significance of our memories are different depending on who experienced it. I play a bit with this in Deck's Legacy. In the books later on, I mean, gaslighting is a thing. Now we're taking this to a very unpleasant sort of manipulative use of memory. Gaslighting is when you say it didn't happen like that, it happened like this, and I'm going to tell you the version of your life that
A term
you should
that
believe.
came from literature.
Exactly,
Yes.
a term that came from literature. Now, Nathaniel Dex is abusive, gaslights to high heaven. You didn't think that at the time, you thought this. This is how he operates. And that is when you are absolutely saying your version of this memory is not how it happened. My version is, therefore, you are wrong. You have to look to me for the context of your reality, for what happened truly. You can't trust yourself. You must trust how I remember it instead. Therefore, you have to rely on me to dictate your reality. That is a very unpleasant way of carrying on. It is a horrible way.
But gaslighting in that context works because memory is such an unreliable thing.
And we look to certainty. If somebody is absolutely with certainty and confidence telling you that something happened one way, it's really tempting to just say, oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And it has so much more to do with personality than it has to do with the reliability of other people, of either person's memory.
Yeah.
It's just confidence.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Exactly.
But we will come back to the unreliability of memory, which I think plays a huge role in so many stories.
And so many arguments.
And we'll come back to that shortly. But I just want to just explore a little bit more about memory and how it colours our worldview. I think it's fair to say that our heads are full of memories all the time. Although we must live in the present, all of our experiences of the world, other people and ourselves come from things that have happened in the past, whether that's 10 years ago or 2 minutes ago. So should memories dominate everything in our stories, as they tend to in our actual lives?
This is interesting.
No.
You don't. Okay.
I'm just.
I have a feeling we're going to disagree, and this is
no. It's just that I don't think there's a should. I think.
Oh, well, yeah.
I think that what happens in our lives is that we're not living as critics. We're living as actors. It's happening at the time. So what we're remembering and how we are in the present. And then you say a word that makes me think about such and such a person, and then I'm flashback to a place where I'm having a conversation with them, and then I'm back to you. So I, / the reader, see a link between you and that person that you and that person might never see in a million years, might probably not even know each other existed, and so on and so on, but it's a real link for me. It's absolutely what happens. We interact not with each other, but with our versions of each other and the implications that we read into what other people say in a room with us. So yes, memory is having an enormous effect on us the whole time. So for the main character I'm writing at the moment, she's got a lot of unfinished business with her family and the messaging that she got in her youth about how she interacts with other people. So she's carrying her memories very actively. But that might not be as true for every character, as at least not as obvious for every character. Yes, we're all doing it. Of course we are, categorically. But it doesn't mean that we want to shove it in the reader's face in manner of a custard pie. It's more about the suggestion. It's more about showing relevant details rather than excessive details. Because that's how we live.
So if I'm getting what you're saying correctly there, it's something to do with a combination of memory and perception.
I think that would be the word for me, is perception, that memory is a key ingredient, but it's not in the driving seat. It's a very active backseat driver, but it's perception that drives reality.
Okay, let's see if this is really an opposite view.
I think it's just a different emphasis on it, because when I talk about character building, I talk about giving characters context and following the why, Warren. Why are they like this? Why did that happen? Why do they feel like that? Why? And the reason for that is that when you do the whys, you work out what happened in their past. That character remembers what happens in their past. That's the reason why they're acting the way they are. Now, whether they explicitly remember those things or not as the character, doesn't matter. You as the writer should know that. And you should be able to bring all of that context into how they react at any given moment. But you can tell this in very plot-driven stuff where the character is just there really as a device, in that you don't really get any, they're just there to interact with what's happening with the now, but you don't get much backstory from them. You don't get much in the way of context of who they are. But character-driven stories, you need to know who they are, you need to know why they are, you need to know how they got to where they are and how they're going to react to things. It needs to be consistent. And that is memory. And the why, Warren, is how you get to that memory. It's how you build out and flesh out those memories. So, yeah, I mean, in the context of writing conversations, you might not be writing this brought the character back to blah, 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 and being very explicit about it. But all of the stuff that you know about this character's past is being brought to bear on how they're reacting in that scene.
Yes. And I think that, the upshot of this is that if you imagine that every character in your story has a head full of memories, they interpret those memories, they have different perceptions of those memories, and suddenly you get this sort of branching out thing of all of the memories, and suddenly you're like in the middle of the universe with a little sign saying you are here, and it's all too much and your mind's blown. So memory, as we've hinted at today already, and certainly in other episodes of this podcast, is notoriously unreliable. Police officers taking witness statements can often, and actually will usually, get contradictory accounts of events from different witnesses to the same recent thing. Would it be a mistake, therefore, as writers, for memory to always be seen as accurate in our fiction?
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it? Because every relationship probably has some element, I'm not going to say 100%, but some element of both people really wanting the best and caring about the other person. And as we've touched on quite a few times, the closer you are to someone, the more mammoth the things you feel like you disagree on, the more desperate you are to show your side of it. And what you often will do in wanting to explain your side of it is actually make a mountain out of a previous molehill, and that goes on a lot. So what we're often doing is trying to show our side of events to the other person. And that can come across as I'm right and you're wrong, because that is our perception. A lot of people, a lot of the times, just want to show why they're right to say and think what they do.
Or rational, at least.
Or rational, or worthy of being in the room, when quite often nobody said that they're not. And there is a Red Dwarf line where the cat says, when he sees a perceived enemy, better make myself look big. And then does a very big gesture. And that's what goes through a cat's head when it, sees a prospective enemy. And that's what I often think of when I see people showing the worst sides of themselves, because they're trying to show you their version of events. And that does come from memory. And it also does bring in flashback, that often when you're triggered or you're annoyed by something, it's not because of what's happening in that room at the time. It's because of something that's happened in many rooms before, or a room before. Yes. And that's what you're bringing into the present reality.
Yeah.
I used to avoid writing flashbacks because a very early creative writing teacher just had it in for them. And I do have a massive history of people pleasing. But what I agree with her on is that you don't want to give beginner writers the idea that flashing back all the time is a great idea. But when it is for a specific reason, it's a bit like swearing. When you do it in exactly the right place, it's brilliant. But if you do it in literally every sentence, it becomes nothing.
Malaise.
It becomes litter on the street. It's just in the way. But it can be enormously powerful, but it does need to be because there is something of particular power.
I think this harks back to another discussion when we were talking about unreliable narrators. One of the categories of unreliable narrators is that involuntary unreliability that we all have, where we don't remember things in quite the way that they actually happened, or that other people remember them.
I'm experiencing that right now, because
you don't remember us having that
story. No, opposite. Your story, Emily, about Inkpen as a surname appearing in your life in different versions.
Version better.
I heard that, and the story that I want to tell now, I know I also told in a previous podcast. I'm going to say it in a short way, but the idea with both is that I think we're clarifying what we're saying each time we say it, and clarifying the relevance and all of that. But when I had my unreliable narrator moment, it was remembering when Tom Baker said I was perfect, which was obviously, the biggest thing that can happen to any given human being in their life. Autograph queue, got to the front, did my usual joke about being short because I was with tall men, short asses at the front of the photo, please. Tom Baker said, "You are perfect as you are." And
you're done now.
Half my life ago, and I feel like that was probably the pinnacle, and ever will be. So anyway, I peaked.
Yeah.
It was in public and everything. But anyway, the relevance of that rather than the fan fiction of that.
What a shame.
Well, not going to lie, yes. But the reason I mention it is that at the time when I was telling friends this story, I would say that it was my ex-boyfriend Alex, who I'm still very good friends with, and his best friend Ben, because that was who I thought it was. And I told this story countless times with it being Ben. Ben was at my house where I now live with my partner, and I said something along the lines of, remember when we met Tom Baker? And he said, no. And I said, what? And he said, one of the things that's not great about my life is I haven't met Tom Baker. I texted Alex and eventually got the answer. It wasn't Ben, it was this other friend. And as soon as he said it, my memory gave me back the photograph that he and I both own of all of us in that photo. And lo and behold, yes, very obviously, and in a jacket I categorically remember being in the room, was this other guy who I knew owned that. It was so obvious once I'd been corrected, but I had told that story so many times, believing myself to have the coherent details, and we don't. But that brings me back to the initial point, which is it's not the forensic veracity that makes the story relevant, it's what you've taken forward from that story. So your characters and you as a writer can only and need to draw on what they need to draw on.
The problem is that as a writer you can be absolutely aware of the fact that if you are telling something from a character's point of view, it is not necessarily accurate, or like it is not necessarily exactly how that scene is playing out. For instance, with Ren, if I'm in his head or if I'm like on his shoulder, I'll be focusing on the points of frustration in a conversation. That might not necessarily be the focus that another person in the room would draw from it. If I was writing it from Varian's point of view, the focus would be on other things going on, not those things. But the point is, we're with Ren. That's his experience of it. His memories of that conversation will be the points of frustration, the points where people were making silly things, like say comments that didn't make sense and were informed by the wrong information. And that is absolutely intrinsically his experience of it. Is it right? No, not necessarily. But is it him? Yes, absolutely it's him.
Yeah. It's real for him.
It's real for him. And whether he's interpreting it as a arrogant little shit is, well, I mean, like, that's just him, isn't it? Again, it's just him. It's how he is. It's how he's wired.
A few episodes ago in the last series, we talked about foreshadowing. Are there ways in which memory and foreshadowing work together in a story?
Oh, definitely.
If the reader knows enough about the character and how the character is going to react, they can predict the reaction. And the prediction of the reaction from the reader is the foreshadowing.
Yep.
And I think in that episode, we also talked about foreslathering, which is when you then explicitly say that all of these things about the character's past, and then this happens, as though that's then making it absolutely unmistakably clear that this is significant and this is how it relates to the rest. You don't need to do that.
It can also be done with characters, can't it? Because I was just thinking about Brideshead Revisited and how the relationship with Sebastian turns out to be a foreshadowing of the relationship with his sister. And it's the same character falling in love with different people, but an essential something that goes through the family. That I find very interesting, because I think there's a very big truth there about people's relationships going through their lives, that we're exploring a story of our own with different people, and how the first romantic relationship that a character has will have some things in common with a later one. And it's very good grounding to see how a character grows and how a character changes.
So like how one relationship ends is going to foreshadow trickiness that they have with a next relationship.
Or the opposite, that because of what happened, they are able to handle exactly the same situation a different way next time around. There's a short story, it's not precisely a short story cycle, it sort of is, because there's a central repetition of different eras of a character's life that I mentioned in an earlier episode. Catherine Heine, single, carefree, mellow, the irony being that nobody is any or all of those things and they all feel like they're supposed to be. And what happens with a woman trying to decide between two men in her life, and how she responds to the younger sister of her partner and what she wants from her relationship with her mother-in-law. You see these things grow, but they only grow authentically because of the mistakes that get made along the way. And the mistakes are us as main characters in our lives and in our fiction fine-tuning ourselves as the protagonist and getting to know ourselves, not towards the end that we are absolutely 100% self-actualized and perfect, but just that we know who we are and what we want.
I've talked about before the fact that characters are layers of an onion, and how in Dex Legacy I wrote the stories of them when they're 26 to 28 first, and then I've had to peel back layers to get to them where they are in the Dex Legacy when they're 15. Now, one of the things I did when they were older is refer back. I was constantly referring back to the traumas that they'd experienced as children and the layers of scars that had built up in their lives that contributed to them being these imperfect monsters of people later on, just damaged people. And it's like peeling back the layers of memory to get to where they were at before. And as the memories are being made, it's really interesting knowing the memories that I've referred to in the books later, knowing the memories I'm going to have to address in the story, but not having got there yet, not having felt the effects of them yet. So like memory layers being the onion and the person at the core.
Yes.
Yeah. But also what can be so sort of extra delicious in that is there will be things, and I know you know this with them, is the things that the characters, even after it's all happened, are completely unaware of, that we don't see in ourselves, but we will see in our loved ones, we will see in our friends. We see how certain people get triggered by certain things or certain patterns, but the character themselves is unaware. And that's why it's so important not to be too expositionary about it, because actually what the reader is seeing of the character is so much more honest than anything you can explain manually to them.
Yeah.
Now, I want to explore a plot device that is entirely about memory, and that is actually memory loss. And there's been lots of stories where a character wakes up and they don't know who they are, how they got there, and we as readers piece together that past, or don't actually in some cases. So what is it about memory loss as a plot device that works so beautifully?
I mean, I'm just going to jump in and say, when I read what I think you're probably thinking of, among others, S.J. Watson, Before I Go to Sleep, which was phenomenally successful with many, many reasons, there was so much in that was an existing fear. One thing it did very well was setting up the power dynamic, that it's the woman who is physically less strong or big, and we're so used to that in society that we forget how that's playing out in literally all of our interactions. But what it does is it takes things that are purely real, that are not dependent on memory. When there is a bigger creature than you, you are fundamentally weaker than it is physically. It doesn't mean that's the whole of the relationship. It just means it's always there. And it did this very beautifully, that you have this, she wakes up, she doesn't know who he is, where she is, and he sort of sighs and kind of deals with it and explains, look, you know, you're my wife, you've lost your memory, we kind of go through this every day. And it's a few rotations before we even realise that this apparently lovely, patient man, let's leave it as, is not what he seems, you know, is not necessarily using his power to purely tell her the truth. Now, that was a brilliant, brilliant onion of an opening, because it works on the surface, but also, you know, if it was as simple as that, it would still be a damn good plot. But actually, he's not what he seems, and we're going in and we're going in and we're going in. And the nothing is as it seems. Nobody is a reliable source of information. The narrator is lost, doesn't know who they are, let alone being able to tell you honestly who they are. So it is rich in possibility.
And the vulnerability that gives to a character, and the peril that it places them in.
The optimistic version of that is obviously The Notebook.
Oh, yeah.
With the romance side of things.
Yeah.
Which is justified. I mean, it would have a very different impact, that movie, if we didn't see the moment of lucidity at the end, when she comes back for the moment and is so happy.
But just for anyone who doesn't know, is in a care home. It's been her partner
telling the story of their life, and the romance story, really, of their life. Then she comes back and we see that she is Ali, the person he has been describing, not somebody else. it would have been very sinister if she'd come back and was not who he had been describing the entire time, but was a very different person in that moment of lucidity and was like, what are you talking about? It didn't happen like that. That would have been a very different movie, but it's a romance because he has been describing it the way, and she is that person, and it's lovely. But yeah, I mean, that is a vulnerability. You are having your life read back to you in that moment.
Your partner's version of your life read back to you. Wow.
Danny would tell
now
that
there's a horror movie.
Yeah, that's interesting.
There's another subgenre.
Never mind the monster under the bed. This is the one in
the bed. Yeah, absolutely.
So films and books that deal with dementia, I think also have elements of that. And I think the most painful are the ones where there is a realization of the individual that memory is being lost, that capabilities are being lost. It's very moving to us. We understand, I think, intrinsically, without expressing it really, how memory and capabilities, intellectual faculties are important to us, I think.
One of my early memories is when I first came to live in England. My grandmother had progressive dementia and we were living with my grandparents when I first came back. And one of the things I remember her saying while she could still speak was desperately trying to explain to my mother and grandfather, but don't you understand, I will never be able to find words again. I will never be able to find words again. And I remember it so clearly. And I think it did probably push me towards writing. And Emily and I have talked on this podcast about our relationships with time and the sense of not having enough time. And that was a huge deal for me, is that what's ahead of you has a relationship with what's behind you, and you want to be able to, again, I think it's the Goethe quote, I want to tell my stories to find out if they are true. There is a need to understand and to share that I think a lot of writers understand and share. But yes, I think it is a very powerful subject, and Terry Pratchett called it the imbuggerance when he was diagnosed with it, but which was just the best example of understatement that I have heard in this language.
British.
Yeah. And we don't have control over how much time we have. We don't have control over our memories. So I think being able to write with emotional honesty and vulnerability around that is a very positive and extremely difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And all I would say to our intended audience, which is writers wanting to see what is possible, is do write your story, and you can fictionalize the bejesus out of it, as I so often say, but the emotional truth is there, and you do have a right to share it.
Well, quite. Well, let's move on then to Flashback.
Flashbacks.
Ooh. Yes. Yeah. And
it was all a dream. No,
well,
sorry.
The end.
That's a perfect example of a lazy...
I hate that.
So can we define what a flashback is, and how does it differ, I guess, from a simple memory?
Or a simple flash and Mac.
A memory is real. A flashback in real sense, in terms of not written down in literature, is often when you get a very vivid replay of something that takes you back to the moment. It's very common in conditions like PTSD, where you suddenly are in a moment that was traumatic, and it is very real.
Hugely
and
real
you
too.
see it
Yes.
again, you are right there, you're smelling it, you're hearing it, you're feeling it. It is very real, and then suddenly you blink and you're back in reality. That is a flashback, and often it is trauma related and terrifying. A flashback in literature, when you're writing it, is often a vivid description of something that has happened in the past to a character.
Although when done well, the character is experiencing that flashback at the time.
But in the form of more like memory, but a detailed description of a memory. So if you are writing a flashback in terms of a PTSD moment, I have done this, and my description of it tends to be, because it's so fast and so intense, the description of the actual moment tends to be quite sparse and swift. And then it's the aftermath that is very interesting to play with. If I'm doing a flashback in terms of memory, a person sitting there and thinking about something that happened in their past, reliving that thing on purpose, that is more extensively played out. But then that's why I say it's a difference. A real life flashback is normally traumatic, awful, leaves you in a horrible place. A flashback, as is often described in literature, is a character reliving a memory kind of on purpose and is aware of the fact that they are living a memory, and it's an opportunity to explain that memory and bring the reader in to that section of memory. Yes. A real life flashback is different to a literary flashback.
Yeah, and I'm writing somebody who I don't say has PTSD, but for her, it is that thing that PTSD is, where it's a memory. You know, it's a memory. When it's PTSD, you feel like it's happening now.
Yes.
So the thing that triggers you, you're not in a state of this reminds me of, you're in a state of that danger is happening now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's definitely, at the risk of sounding extremely utilitarian, a good thing to try out.
Yeah.
Just to see what that feels like in writing terms, to go into that memory and walk around in it and be there and know what the body feels like and know what the air quality feels like and the taste in your mouth and be there does give you extremely useful details so that you understand this world and you understand why it's significant to your character.
I think what we've talked about there is possibly characters flashing back. I think writers sometimes use flashbacks almost from a narrator point of view to explain events outside the heads of their characters. So, for example,
15 years earlier.
To explain a little bit more about why this thing is happening.
Last Wednesday.
Why this person is the way they are, flashback to them being abused as a child. You know, things, that's quite a crude one, but things like that. I mean, is that something that you've ever played around with?
Yeah, absolutely. One that I think does it very well, and there are many, but Grady Hendrix' How to Sell a Haunted House, which is about
title,
isn't it? Which is about dealing with how you have interpreted your own family. There's a supernatural side to it, but fundamentally what it's about is family-based trauma and generational trauma, and how your version of the people around you can be more real to you than the potential for it actually to still be okay in the relationships. Obviously, the supernatural helps because you can chuck yourself back into things, but the time periods do move around in a variety of ways. You get to see previous episodes and you've already experienced characters' memories and beliefs and understandings of what happened, and then you get to be there once you already know there's more than one version and oh my god, who do I trust? And probably nobody. And then you get to see it. That does it very well.
Is it something you've played around with, Flashback?
Technically, the entire Dex legacy is a flashback to the trilogy that I originally wrote. It's all a fever dream, and it's just got way out of hand. Yeah, so I mean, I just doubled down on this whole.
I feel like I've been complicit in this.
Oh my god! Yeah, you're an enabler. Yeah,
sorry everyone.
So it's about peeling back the onion and getting to the source.
Onion sauce.
Onion sauce, exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Gravy.
Onion sauce. I'm really good at onion sauce at the moment. It's definitely something that I've played around with. It's something that I did in the first novel to get, we're feeling it in the sort of the presence. They've been talking to each other about it, but I took one character in a sort of flashback dream, and it's referred to that he has this recurring dream about something horrible that happened in the past. And we actually experience that dream with him. And I hate doing that because I don't like it when things are like, it's a dream and we do it in a dream sequence. But people do have recurring dreams about traumatic things.
And they have huge influence on your life as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is a thing. And he describes it as hadn't had that dream for years. And then it happened again at a very auspicious moment.
And that's a brilliant example of needing to ignore that voice that says I shouldn't do this because this works for the story.
It does work for the story. It's true. It is a true moment of his experience. Whether or not I executed it very well, I mean, well, that's for an edit. That's a question for my edit self. But being able to live that memory and that flashback with him and see it from his point of view and the horror in that moment and understand where he's at in the present in relation to this thing that's just happened and get that view. Because it's such a personal thing going through something horrific. You show people's behaviour. Well, why is he this distant? Why is he so resistant towards this thing? Why is he being so difficult? well, when you see what it was like from his point of view, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
But he's not ready to talk about it. Therefore, the reader isn't going to know. So how do you communicate that in any other way than showing the reader?
Yeah.
And to show it. It's a difficult thing.
And it's as traumatic an event in that character's day as it would be if someone came up and punched them in the street.
Yeah.
So
waking up from a dream like that.
We've all done it.
Yeah.
It's a terrible way to start your day, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's a great way to end a podcast either. But
do you want an exercise instead?
Well,
let's have an exercise.
Let's do an exercise related to memory and flashback.
Here is a memory / flashback exercise to explore. Whether you start with you or start with a character, I'm still going to say character because we're all characters, really. We're all raw material to be drawn on. Have your character wake up and either remember what they've dreamt about, or better still, not remember, but be physically affected by it.
Yes.
We don't need to know what they dreamt, but we can be with them as they get back into themselves. And that allows you to get to know that character very well. It gets you to know where they live, what they're feeling, etc., etc. Going to let you into a little secret. It possibly won't make the final bit of the iceberg that goes in the book. People use this as a wonderful way to get to know their character and their environment. But it might just be one for you. So what I'm going to ask you to do, just between you and me, is be really, really self-indulgent. Go all around the house. Know what kind of oat milk or soya milk or orange juice comes out of the fridge. Know what colour their carpet is. You will probably not use an eighth of this, but my God, it's fun. And you get the confidence of knowing who you are and where you are. Let them do some thinking during that time. Let them think about the people who are important to them. Let them have memories of them. Let it go on and on. Be utterly richly self-indulgent. Use it as a research trip around your character's world.
Mm.
Like looking at the photographs on the mantelpiece and the...
Yeah. Well, every photograph is a memory, isn't it? And in that sense, in our homes, we're surrounded by...
time capsules.
By memories, and they're time capsules. Hopefully this has been obviously incomplete, but a little journey, a little toe dipped into the world of memory and flashback.
I'm sure we'll remember it very differently.
We'll remember it as as a authoritative text on the subject.
Absolutely.
Listeners, thank you as always for downloading the Writers' Gym podcast. Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you for listening to the Writers' Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writers' Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writers' Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writers' Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.